Lieutenant Grace O'Connell could hear the gunfire echoing through the valley, the sharp staccato blasts rattling in her ears as she raced across the rocky terrain. The smell of smoke and dust clung to the air, the heat of the desert sun beating down on her. She didn't notice it, though. All she could focus on was her brother, Private Sean O'Connell, lying just ahead. Sean! Grace's heart pounded as she dropped to her knees beside him, blood soaked through his uniform, staining the dry earth beneath him. Her training kicked in, calm, methodical. But inside, she was screaming. Sean looked up at her, eyes wide with fear but also trust. "Grace," he whispered, his breath shallow. "You'll get me home, right?" Grace swallowed hard and forced a smile, though her hands trembled. "I've got you. Just hang on." She worked quickly, applying pressure to the wound, trying to stabilize him. But she knew the damage was too great. No amount of training could prepare her for this moment, for the realization that she couldn't save the one person she loved most in the world. "I'm sorry," Grace whispered, as Sean's breathing slowed. Tears blurred her vision, but she held his hand, refusing to let go. "You did your best," he murmured, his voice fading. "Get them home, Grace. Get them all home." And then he was gone. Grace didn't remember much after that. Her fellow soldiers carried her back to the base. She was sent home, a hero in the eyes of everyone around her. But all she felt was emptiness. Back in the US, Grace walked into her family's home in Massachusetts, a place filled with memories of her and Sean growing up. But it wasn't the same. The silence felt too loud, the air too thick. Every room reminded her of her brother, the brother she had promised to protect but couldn't. Months passed, but Grace didn't heal. Her parents tried to support her, but they were grieving too. Grace withdrew, isolating herself in the small apartment she rented near Boston. The nights were the worst. She would close her eyes and hear Sean's voice, see his face in her dreams, only to wake up to the harsh reality that he was gone. Everyone expected her to bounce back. She had been a medic, a lifesaver on the battlefield. But she had failed Sean. Guilt weighed on her like a heavy chain, and she couldn't find the strength to break free. One afternoon, as Grace sat alone in her dark living room, an envelope slipped through the mail slot, landing softly on the floor. She almost didn't open it. But something about the handwriting on the front caught her eye. It wasn't official. It was personal. She tore open the envelope and found a letter inside, handwritten on lined paper. "Dear Lieutenant O'Connell, you probably don't remember me, but I remember you. You saved my life in battlefield when I got hit by shrapnel. You were calm, focused, and refused to give up, even when things seemed impossible. I think about that day a lot. You not only saved me, but you gave me hope when I had none. I wanted to invite you to my wedding. I'm marrying the woman I was writing letters to when I was deployed. I'd be honored if you could come. I wouldn't be here without you. Thank you for everything, Sergeant David Lewis." Grace stared at the letter, her hands shaking. David Lewis. She did remember him, a soldier she had pulled through in the middle of chaos. She had been so wrapped up in her own grief over Sean that she had forgotten all the lives she had touched on the battlefield. But this letter was a reminder that her service had meant something. She had made a difference, even if she couldn't save her brother. Grace read the letter again. Something stirred inside her, a small flicker of warmth in the cold darkness that had surrounded her for so long. Maybe she wasn't as lost as she thought. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a bridge back to herself. The wedding was in a small town in upstate New York. Grace almost didn't go. She packed and unpacked her bag several times, standing in her bedroom debating whether she could face people, face her past. But then she thought of Sean. He would want her to go. He would want her to move forward. So she went. The wedding was simple, held in a quiet chapel surrounded by autumn trees. Sergeant David Lewis was beaming when he saw her arrive. He came up to her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Lieutenant O'Connell," he said, saluting her with a smile. "Grace, she corrected him, shaking his hand. David introduced her to his wife, a kind woman who hugged Grace tightly, thanking her for bringing David home. During the reception, several soldiers approached Grace, each with their own story of how she had helped them in the field. Some of their faces were familiar, others she didn't remember, but their words stayed with her. "You saved my leg. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. You kept us going." For the first time in months, Grace didn't feel the crushing weight of failure. These men and women were living proof of the good she had done, the lives she had touched. She had carried out Sean's final request. She had gotten them home. As the night wore on, David pulled Grace aside. "I know you've been through a lot," he said, his tone serious, "but we need you. There are so many veterans out there struggling to transition back to civilian life. They need someone like you, someone who's been there, who understands. I'm starting a support group for veterans in Boston, and I think you'd be perfect to help out." Grace felt a lump form in her throat. Helping others? It seemed impossible when she could barely help herself. But something about David's words resonated. Maybe this was what she needed. A new purpose. A way to heal by helping others heal too. "I'll think about it," Grace said softly. Months passed, and Grace kept thinking about David's offer. She had started going to therapy, something she had avoided for a long time. She didn't want to admit she was broken. But the truth was, she wasn't broken. She was hurt, and healing took time. So one day, she found herself standing outside the community center where David's veterans group met. Her hands trembled as she reached for the door, but she took a deep breath and stepped inside. The room was full of people like her, people who had seen too much, lost too much, but were still standing. David smiled at her from across the room, and Grace knew this was the bridge she had been searching for. As she sat down, a quiet strength filled her. She hadn't been able to save Sean, but she could still save others. And in helping them, she was starting to save herself. The road ahead wasn't easy, but Grace no longer felt lost. She had found her way back to a place where hope still existed, where she could build a future in honor of her brother. Sean's memory wasn't a weight she had to carry alone. It was a light guiding her forward, leading her across the bridge back home.